Morning, church. Next slide. I wanted to spend a little bit of time kind of recapping what we've done over the last week. And I say we, I really had a very small part to play. I put the Marvel and DC folks on the opening slide there. I grew up saving my allowance and going to the store and buying it. And if I remember correctly, they were like 30 cents back then. I had a tin kind of filing cabinet full of first edition Superman, first edition Spider-Man stuff. I mean, it was, and then I came home one summer. I read an article when I was in school in Lubbock, and about people making thousands of dollars on first edition comic books. And I thought, wow, I'm sitting on a fortune. So I went home and asked my mom where my little tin cabinet was with all of my comic books in it, and she said, "Oh, we threw those away weeks ago." Yeah, that was the end of my comic book career. Thank God. I wanted superpowers though when I was a kid. I wanted, to be able to right wrongs, and I mean, don't we well, in fact, the truth of the matter is all good literature really revolves around several, just a handful of basic themes, and those themes have to do with the longing of the human condition. We want to see wrongs righted, we want to see the world made to be a better place, etc. We want to experience love, want to give love and have it returned, etc. And so that's kind of where this idea of heroes, as far back as there is human literature, there are heroes and villains. And I've got to tell you, I hope this is okay. I went ahead and put this up on the screen. Ezra was in the bath this morning, and he was playing with superhero-ish, supervillain actually, and he dropped it and it sank in the water. And this is a quote. He said, "He sank just like Peter when he got nervous." So I thought, it's not been a complete waste of time this week because Ezra's been taking notes. Along with the superheroes that we've been looking at this week, I have on the screen, in no particular order, the heroes of this week: Kathy Davis, Tina Ball, Sarah and Andrew Castle, Carla and Charlie, Stephen, Brad and Megan, Megan and Brad, probably in that order. And then our fantastic Okay, Hebrews 11. At the beginning of Hebrews 11, there is a statement about faith itself, and it goes like this. In fact, I could get most of the folks sitting in the pew probably can quote this. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That's kind of our canned answer. If anybody says, "Hey, what's the definition of faith?" We just say, well, faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things not seen. Looky there. I had faith that was going to come back. Next slide. So one of the things that if you read the book of, or if you read Hebrews 11, one of the things that you'll find is that definition revolves around this idea that faith isn't real biblical faith until it motivates you to do something. And I'm going to say that again. because I think it is absolutely critical. Faith isn't real biblical faith until it motivates you to do something. And so I want, I told the young adults, the Faith Fuel crew this morning, that I was going to talk about a couple of heroes that you may not even know who they are. But does this name, Eugene Lazowski, does that ring a bell to anybody? Anybody in here? What an amazing story. Google this guy. He was a doctor during the Nazi occupation of Poland. And he was a Catholic pacifist. He didn't believe, he said, I'll never pick up a rifle. And, you know, some of us in the room would say, you know, well, that's taken Christianity way too far, and, you know, and we should be ready to defend. I'm not interested in discussing pacifism or whether we have the right to defend ourselves. What I want to point out here is that this is an individual whose faith caused him to step out into the unknown and do something significant. I mean, he impacted the lives of 8,000 people. The Nazis had built a ghetto for the Jewish people, just basically in Eugene's backyard. And he's a physician, and he's been told by the Nazis, you cannot do anything to help the Jews. And so at night, the Jewish people who, if there was somebody in the ghetto that needed a doctor's attention, they would come and hang a white rag on his door, and he would sneak into the ghetto at night to take care of the people, the Jewish people who had medical problems. But the Nazis were coming and taking these people, and you guys know where they were taking them, right? So the Nazis were coming into these ghettos, and they were rounding up large numbers of them. I told my Faith Fuel crew this morning that I was going to, the first one I wanted to talk about was a guy who created a fake pandemic, which, you know, in our culture right now, we're dealing with, you know, COVID and monkeypox and all this stuff. So as soon as somebody says fake pandemic, everybody's, you know, eyes open up. So this guy figured out that if he injected people with typhus, a dead strain of the typhus bug, that they would test positive for typhus. And so he went around injecting people all over the place in these ghettos and around the ghettos with dead strain, basically inoculating them. But it caused them to show up positive for typhus, and the Nazis didn't want to take them. And so over a period of 2 or 3 years, between 1939 and 1942, he was credited, he used his superpower. It wasn't you know, slinging webs or, you know, taekwondo. it was his mind, and he used that to save, between 1939 and 1942, he saved approximately 8,000 Jews. And then the Nazis came for him because they figured out what he was doing, and one of the Nazi guards told him they were coming for him, and he slipped out of town and got away. I love that. I love the fact that his faith motivated him to do something significant, and it made a difference in the lives of 8,000 people. Next slide. You guys know who Gordon Wilson is? Another one you should Google if you're not familiar with Gordon Wilson. You know what a draper is? A draper is somebody who makes drapes, right? Now there's a career, you know. Like, how many of you in here have the, you know, desire to become a draper? I don't have my notes up here. Gordon Wilson lived in Enniskillen. Now, does that ring a bell? Some of you will remember the bombing in Enniskillen, Ireland. He he lived in Enniskillen. He was the local draper, and not really a significant standout individual. He made curtains and window hangings and stuff. And this was during the time that Ireland was fighting for its independence from the British colonial rule. And you guys remember the name of the organization that was throwing everything they had to, IRA, right? So the IRA was in the process of trying to wrest Ireland away from British rule. And the Irish people have an equivalent to our not Independence Day, Memorial Day. They have an equivalent to our Memorial Day called Remembrance Day. And on November 8th, 1987, the town of Enniskillen was preparing for this Remembrance Day parade. Unknown to them, the IRA had come in the night before and had planted a bomb or bombs. I couldn't really determine how many had been planted, but they planted at least a bomb, and some reports said several, in the town square, and the bomb went off during the middle of this this parade, and it killed 11 people. And it injured 64. And Gordon Wilson and his young adult daughter were trapped underneath the rubble of a wall that had collapsed on them. And they both were conscious, and both were able to talk. And Gordon is talking to his daughter. And the last words, as she's holding his hand, the last words that she says to him is, "Daddy, I love you." And not long after that, Gordon Wilson and his daughter were both pulled out of the rubble, and his daughter died later that evening. Now, here's where the story gets so amazing. The BBC wanted to interview the survivors, of course, and they go in to Gordon Wilson's room and they interview him. And instead of, by the way, you can Google this and you can hear this interview. It's still online. I mean, this changed the course of history. What happens here? You guys can follow with me right here in the interview with the BBC. This is out of a book that William Ury wrote. In the interview with the BBC, Wilson described with anguish his last conversation with his daughter and his feelings toward her killers. "She held my hand tightly," Wilson says, "and gripped me as hard as she could. She said, 'Daddy, I love you very much.' Those were her exact words to me, and those were the last words I ever heard her say." To the astonishment of the listeners, Wilson went on to add, "But I bear no ill will. I bear no grudge. Dirty sort of talk is not going to bring her back to me, or back to life. She was a great wee lassie." I love that. "She loved her profession." And then Wilson went on to say, "I will pray for these men tonight and every night." And then Ury in his book says, as historian Jonathan Barton recounts, "No words in more than 25 years of violence in Northern Ireland had such a powerful emotional impact." Next slide. A year later, previous slide. There you go. A year later, to commemorate the Enniskillen bombing, Gordon Wilson invited the IRA to come to Enniskillen. And they came. And he told them publicly that he forgave them. And he begged the IRA to stop these tactics. Later, Gordon Wilson became a senator, and Mary McAleese, one of the presidents of the Republic, Ireland, wrote a book called Love and Chaos, and I just have to share what she said in this book. She said, Gordon's words shamed us all and caught us off guard. They sounded so different from what we expected and what we had all become used to. They brought a stillness with them. They carried a sense of the transcendent into a place that had become so ugly that we could hardly bear to watch. But Gordon had his detractors. Now watch this. And unbelievably, he even received bags of hate mail. How dare you forgive? People demanded. What kind of father are you who can forgive your daughter's killers? It was as if Gordon had spoke those words of forgiveness for the first time in human history, as if Christ had never uttered those words, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. One outspoken critic who was a Christian said to me, says this president, said to me about Gordon Wilson, surely the poor man must have been in shock, as if offering love and forgiveness is a sign of mental weakness instead of spiritual strength. I'm here to tell you that the course of history has been impacted in large ways and small ways by people of faith who have stepped out into the unknown, which is one of the basic concepts of real biblical faith. If you know how it's going to end, it isn't what? It isn't faith. If you know how it's going to end, it isn't faith. I mean, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, all of these guys, by the way, that we've been talking about, Moses, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we were talking about Peter in our class this morning. You know, that story about Peter could have just as easily been written this way. Peter jumped over the edge of the boat, and the disciples heard a splash, and that was the end of Peter. Right? I mean, probably the most likely outcome would have been exactly that. Right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, one of my favorites. And one of my favorites because of their statement when the king is confronting them for their refusal. Google this while you're Googling stuff. Google Keith Green's album, No Compromise, and look at the album art. It is so cool. In fact, I should have put that. Oh, yeah. We'll go to the next slide in just a minute. I love it. What was I going to say? Oh, Keith Green. Keith Green's album art shows this one man standing and everybody else, bowing before the image. And one of the reasons that I absolutely love the narrative, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as they are being confronted by the king says, and I love this statement, what God is there who can save you? Except I need some devious voice, but what God is there who can save you from the fiery furnace? And you guys remember what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said? They said, and this is so typical of biblical faith, they said, our God is able, but whether he is going to or not, we don't know. Nevertheless, O king, we are not taking a knee. John Dennis's very rough paraphrase, but I love that. How is this going to end? We're stepping out in faith. I don't know how this is going to end, but I'm here to tell you that stepping out into the unknown, driven by a faith in a God that you can't see, is how significant changes are made for the better on this planet. Instead of reading a bunch of sections, go ahead and turn to Esther chapter 4 and jump to the next. No, stay right where you're at. Do you guys know what the distinction is of the book of Esther? I mean, if I were to say Esther is the only book in the Bible which, does anybody know? What? Yeah, so my Faith Fuel crew just said, it's the only book in the Bible in which God's not mentioned at all. Yeah. And so the way, and I love this, the artistic method that the writer of Esther uses, he doesn't mention God at all, and yet it's just this one constant string of really lucky coincidences in which every time a coincidence unfolds, the reader just says, wow, that's lucky, right? Man, that was lucky. And so the rough overview of the story of Esther is that she was in exile. She had been captured, or at least her family or great-grandparents had been captured. They were living in Canaan. They were captured and taken to Babylon, and eventually Babylon was overthrown by the Medo-Persian Empire. And now all of these exiles are living, in fact, many generations now probably been living in Persia. And the king of Persia, Xerxes, that's a cool name. But I don't think you have to know that to be saved, but just that was King Xerxes, a very historical figure. He's having a big party, and he invites his wife Vashti to come in and show off her beauty, and she says, thank you, no. And the king is somewhat offended by that, and he fires Queen Vashti. And then he decides he's going to basically hold a Miss Medo-Persian beauty contest and pick out his next wife. And he does that, and as luck would have it, he chooses this lady by the name of Esther, who is an orphan being raised by her cousin Mordecai. And along the way, there's this lucky incident where Mordecai finds out about a plot to kill the king, and Mordecai reports it, and the king says, we need to put something on the books so we can remember Mordecai eventually. And so I'm going to do this poorly because there's just so much, almost humorous coincidental events that are unfolding all the way through the book of Esther. But jump over to Esther chapter 4, verse 13. Just when Esther's words... let me just do this real quickly. The villain on the stage. So when he comes on the stage, the piano is playing on the lower register. His name is Haman, and when Haman walks around, he expects people to snap to attention or bow and scrape, and he's very angry about the fact that Mordecai, who's a Jew, and he only bows and scrapes for one person, and who is that? Yahweh, right? So Haman puts together this plot where he is going to basically have all of the Jews killed, and so he's beginning to work on his plot. And Mordecai, the cousin who is raising Esther, urges Esther to go in before the king and reveal what's being done, right? And so verse 12, when Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: do not think that because you are in the king's house that you alone of all the Jews will escape, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, I love this, But who knows but that you have come to the royal position for such a time as this. And one of the things that I've been talking to the Faith Fuel crew about is the fact that God has an assignment that He gives to each person in the church. I don't have time to unpack that, but read the book of Ephesians. It's all over the place in Ephesians. And when you figure out what your assignment is, why you are here on this planet, it transforms everything. It just does. All right, I got to be done with that slide. We'll end here. One of these days, I hope I'll get a chance to see this. This is Macris. There used to be a palace sitting up here on top. This was King Herod's kind of winter getaway. This was his fortress. As far as most people were concerned, totally impenetrable. And when John the Baptist confronted King Herod, he had him imprisoned. We think, the Bible doesn't say, but historians are fairly confident that they had him imprisoned in Macris. And a closer look at this would show that there are cisterns that are dug down into the side of the cliffs on Macris, and there used to be metal grates there, and they would put the worst of the worst criminals in the kingdom in those cisterns and put the metal grates over them. And that's where John the Baptist is in Matthew chapter 11. Matthew chapter 11. And again, I don't have time really to read through this, but I just do want to point this out. This is another one of my favorite faith stories in the Bible, because John keeps getting reports from his disciples, and he's asking them, what's Jesus doing? And they're saying, well, he's having a party with the Pharisees, and he's having a party with tax collectors, and he's, and he's been in prison for a long time. And finally, in Matthew chapter 11, John sends an entourage of his disciples to Jesus. And do you remember what the question was? They came to Jesus and they said, John wants to know, are you the one? Or are we looking for someone else? Man, I love that. I love it because that is so typical of real biblical faith. There are high moments, and then there are moments where you think, maybe I stepped out in faith and this thing just kind of blew up in my face, and what is God really in this? The truth of the matter is, everyone in this room, if they were honest, would tell you that they've had their own moments where they were struggling with doubt. We don't talk about this in church circles, do we? Anybody want to share your moments of doubt? I mean, the majority of us in this room get real squeamish real quick, because faith is kind of the one characteristic that we think is part of a characteristic of the people who get to come to this club, be a part of this club. The truth of the matter is, faith is messy business. In conclusion, I'm just going to tell you, my son Caleb, 5 years-ish, I don't remember exactly how old he was, but I was working on a session that I was going to deliver on Macris and John and that kind of thing, and I had this picture, or one like it, up on my monitor when Caleb was about 4 or 5, and he came into my office and sat down and on my lap, and he said, "Dad, what are you looking at?" And I said, "Well, that's Macris," and I showed him the cisterns in the side of the cliff, and told him that that's where John the Baptist was kept in prison, and And Caleb, in typical DC or Marvel comic mindset, he says, "So there were bad guys?" And I said, oh yeah, there were bad guys. And he said, and John was a good guy? And I said, in fact, in John 11, or Matthew 11, Jesus says, of all the men born of women, so how many men would that be? Yeah, pretty much all of them. Okay, so Jesus says, of all the men born of women, John is by far the greatest. And here he is saying, are you the one, or are we looking for someone else? Caleb says, did the good guys have weapons? And I said, well, probably not like you're thinking. And he said, well, what kind of weapon did they have? And I said, well, they had the truth. And Caleb said, you mean they spoke the truth and it turned bad guys into good guys? And I said, yeah, just like that. Just like that. Faith is messy business. It's good for us to do Veggie Tales. This has been fantastic this week, but several light years beyond the Veggie Tales aspect of all of this, there is this really messy thing called faith, in which people step out into the unknown, and sometimes it ends really badly for them. But they do so and make a significant difference in the course of history on this planet.